Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book loving, notebook hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, and today is a big day. It is the first time in Get Literate podcast history where an author is coming back for a second appearance. Way back in episode 35 in early January 2023, Terry M. Brown joined me to talk about her newest release at the time, An Enemy Like Me. We also snuck in a conversation about her other book that I loved, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow. In those show notes, I said that Terry and I became fast friends and talked all things books and reading, and I was right. That episode launched a virtual friendship that has lasted all year long across hundreds of hours of voice messages on social media. And that's why I am so excited to have her back to talk about her newest book, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. And spoiler alert, it's my favorite of the 3. So, Terry, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you in real time.
Thank you so much for having me, and I love hearing that it's your favorite. So that just warms me up on a cold day.
Good, good. Well, for those that haven't listened to that episode or haven't read your books yet, can you give them a little bit of your backstory of who you are and what you write, and maybe even a sneak peek into all of your books?
All right. So yeah, I'm Terry Brown. I go with Terry M because apparently there's another Terry Brown out there who's an author. Um, and I started writing nonfiction over 20 years ago, but I was working with small businesses doing a lot of website content and ebooks and that kind of thing, and really wanted to be what I considered an author and write fiction, but I was terrified because it's so different. You have to put yourself out there on the line. And at the time, I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. There was no way in the world that I had, the bandwidth really to put yourself out there, because if you fail at it, you need a safe place to land. And I didn't have one of those. So when I got out of that relationship in 2017, I started writing almost immediately. Like words just started tumbling from me, but I had no way that I was going to show them to anyone. Because just because you get out of a bad relationship doesn't mean that you feel good about yourself yet. So I don't know, I went over a year. Then I met my now husband. I was never getting married again, but here I am married again. And he was such a fan immediately. I let him read my stuff, and he really pushed me to keep writing. And he wanted me to get it out there, but I was still terrified. Then we did our huge adventure where he and I rode 3,102 miles across the United States on a tandem bicycle. And if anyone knows me personally at all, they understand that this was huge for me. I'm a desk jockey. I enjoy being outdoors, but like collecting seashells or, a walk along a boardwalk. Like I'm not adventure kind of material. So, but I wanted to do something big, and we did. And I got on that bicycle and rode 3,000 miles across the United States. It took 72 riding days. We were gone for 3 months. We did it in the summer of 2020, so COVID summer. So it was like a crazy adventure. And when I got done, I realized I could do anything I wanted to do.
Yes.
I could do, it wasn't can I, it was what do I want to do? And I wanted to be an author. And that's when I got the manuscript for Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, which was my debut novel, into the right hands. And 1 year and 2 months later, it was published. And since then, I am now on book number 3. So I have Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, which is about 3 generations of Ukrainian women. I know someone who's Ukrainian. She told me an amazing story that was so overwhelmingly amazing that I decided I needed to write 82,000 words of fiction so I could tell my 3 pages of truth. And I tell everyone the last 3 pages of the last chapter are true, and then everything else is my imagination as to how we ended up there. And then An Enemy Like Me is my second. It came out in January of 2023. And it um, is a World War II genre, but it's not really about the war as much as it's about what war does to family. And Jacob is a first generation German American. And when he decides that he needs to fight in the war, he believes he'll fight the Japanese. And that's an enemy he can get behind. And he ends up in Germany, where he realizes he's more like the enemy than he is different from the enemy. So we kind of look at that whole war from his point of view, but also his wife, who's left behind, and then from his child's perspective. He's 4 years old, and then we see him as an adult man kind of reflecting back. And now I have Daughters of Green Mountain Gap coming out. So,
Yes, which is the book that we'll get to dive into a little bit more today. I think though, across all of your books, and we've talked about this before and before we hit record, your books are impossible not to just fall into because of the characters that the readers meet. And not just one, right? We get multiple characters across multiple generations and multiple time periods. And there's just something about them that I don't want to end. I don't want to turn that last page because I've become so invested in them, whether they are characters that I feel like I can relate to, like in Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, or even characters that are not me. I'm not a man. I'm not going to fight in a war, but I felt connected in a way to the character that I was surprised by. So your books just have the power to suck readers in and keep them there and
thank
not want
you.
to go.
Thank you. I tell people that, my first 3 books that have come out are historical fiction. Although Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, although they say it's historical fiction, it's really 1970s to present. I have a real hard time calling that historical fiction in my mind. It makes me old and I don't like it. But even so, I still that one is like on an edge of whether it's historical fiction or not. But I tell people that's not really what I'm writing. I happen to have picked those time periods, but I'm writing character-driven fiction.
Mhm.
If you like good, strong characters, then you're going to love my stories because that's what I really focus on. That's what I love. I love the character development. And then you'll want to go with them on their stories. So whether it's, an 1890s granny woman or a 1970s woman in Ukraine, or I'm currently writing a book that's a contemporary comedy about a woman who's going through menopause and is recently divorced, regardless of who or where, you're going to want to go because of the characters. So
Yes. Yes. And I did, and I loved all three of them, but as I mentioned in the opening, Terry, this one's my favorite.
oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm hoping that shows that as an author I'm growing.
Well, and I also think it's when we get the right book at the right time for
Yes.
whatever we need ourselves as readers, the magic happens. And for me, in this season of life, in this phase of life, in this whatever is going on in my world, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap was the book that I needed. And so it was a perfect fit. So let's go there. Give us a little overview of Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. This beautiful, remarkable book about three women that I did not want to say goodbye to.
So I wanted to bring that up. I have had a lot of people say, "Are you going to do a sequel? Are you going to do a sequel to my other two?" And it's like, no, I've kind of wrapped up those characters and moved on. But everybody's like, "You could, we'd read it."
I know. In your mind, you wrapped it up. They are not
Yeah,
wrapped up in ours.
they're not wrapped up. Everybody's like, "No, no, there's more, there's more." So yeah, with Daughters of Green Mountain Gap, she's a granny woman. It's 1890s and she's a granny woman. But I want to drop back just a minute and tell you the funny way that I came up with this idea at all. I had a wart on my thumb and I went to my primary care and not for the wart, but just, and happened to say, "Oh, I have this wart. Can you like freeze it off or whatever?" So no, she could not do that. She was going to have to send me to a hand specialist because it was on my thumb, like on the padded part of my thumb. And I rolled my eyes and went to CVS and got one of those patches and, took my wart off. Well, I was on the phone with my brother and we were both complaining how recently our primary care had gotten to the point where they did nothing in the office. They do nothing. They take your temperature and your blood pressure and they send you to a specialist. That's pretty much what they do. And we were both kind of complaining. And so I told him about my wart and he said, "Why didn't you have someone talk it off?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, I've got a friend who talks off warts." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, he whispers something to it, and 3 days later, your wart will be gone." Well, I am one of those really naive people, and my family does this to me, where they say things and they act all sincere, and then I'm all in, and then later everyone starts to laugh and make fun of me because, in fell Terry. So I didn't believe him. I got off the phone and was like, "Yeah, huh?" But I had to look it up because I'm that research Google junkie kind of person. And lo and behold, they do have people that talk off warts. And they have people
Yeah.
that can blow in your mouth and get rid of thrush. And they can talk to a baby that is breech and get the baby to flip and become, like where it's supposed to. And
Right?
all of these crazy things. And the more I read, the more it was leading me to the Appalachian mountain traditions of the granny woman. And before long, Maggie, who's, the oldest of the generations, started talking to me in my head. And I knew that somehow I was going to have to tell her story. And so Maggie is not real in terms of it's not any one given granny woman in the mountains, but she she's kind of like a conglomerate of what you would expect to find with these granny women. And granny women, they are kind of herbalists in a lot of ways. They know all about roots and herbs and flower petals and stems and what things you can put together to cure ailments. And you have to remember the time period. So for this story, it's 1890s, and 1890s in the North Carolina mountains was very, very rural, um, very backward in terms of modern conveniences. I mean, 1890s was still probably 100 years, like if from Boston, it would have looked more like Boston 100 years prior, And so it's just very, and the town I have them in outside of Burnsville is just this little tiny, just nothing place. And she's practicing her medicine. But it's more than just roots and herbs. She also, most granny women and Maggie, it's like there's a little bit of mountain magic. Like I don't know, it's like they know things and they can sense things and they don't always give the same person the same thing because they have a feeling.
Yep.
And Maggie happens to also have befriended a Cherokee healer. And so she gets some of her ideas from him, which causes a big stir in her community because at the time in the 1890s, we'd already run the Cherokee completely off to reservations out west, except for one small group that got to stay in the North Carolina mountains. And so there is a lot of still controversy among, they're considered savages, right? And the fact that she's speaking to them and then actually using some of their techniques to help people in her white community, right? But causes a lot of attention. But that's not the only tension. She also has a daughter, and her daughter is just doesn't like the way her mother practices medicine, and she has her reasons, which you'll find in the book. She doesn't like what her mom does, but she also feels like she's called to heal. She ends up, though, going and becoming a nurse, an actual nurse. She goes into a big city. She goes to a college. She becomes a nurse. She comes back to her community with a doctor in tow. And she's sure that the community is just going to you know, fall in love because, here we are with a real doctor. And she's a little ticked off that a lot of people choose to go to her mom instead. So there's a lot of tension. But just to ramp it up a bit, I throw in one more generation. So Carrie Ann has a daughter named Josie May. Carrie Ann calls her Josephine May, and everyone else calls her Josie May. And Josie May can kind of see the good in both, but she doesn't know what she's supposed to do because there's such animosity going on that when she tries to do things her grandmother's way, it takes her mother off. And when she tries to do things her mother's way, it isn't that Granny's upset. It's just she doesn't feel like it holds all the answers. And
Mhm.
so she's kind of really torn both ways. Like which way do you go? Well, in the end, we kind of see where sometimes there isn't an answer, and that is it modern medicine that's going to fix you? Is it roots that's going to fix you? Is it just faith in one or the other that's going to fix you? That's kind of like where that story goes, and we just go with them across all of the angst of sicknesses that affect the area and women who really want to help but don't see eye to eye.
Right. I'm saying we like it's our book, but I got to read it early and I feel like we've had so many wonderful conversations about it. The reader also in the journey of these three women experiences so many themes that aren't just prevalent in, the late 1800s, but are very much alive and well today. So these current themes of just family, right? And the tensions and the conflicts in family,
Exactly.
mother-daughter relationships, right? Those are still ever present today. But then bigger themes like racism, like loss, like this balance between the conventional and the unconventional. Even though it took place so long ago, I felt like the story could still hold very true today in 2024 when this episode is airing because of those characters, of those things that they were kind of going through and moving through and learning through. I feel like even though it is historical fiction, it's something that everybody can walk away with something from today. How did you, or did you know, because I know that you've described yourself as a pantser before, where you
Yeah.
just kind of write on the seat of your pants. Did you know where you wanted the story to go beyond a wort talker, right? That you were going to explore those two aspects of medicine? Or did those themes just come naturally as the characters kind of revealed themselves?
For me, it's more of a revealing kind of thing. It became apparent very, very early that I needed Maggie to meet a Cherokee. I don't remember what research I was doing, but something came up and it was like, almost like an explosion in my head. It was like, oh my gosh, that's what needs to happen. And as soon as I knew that, I knew that we were going to be dealing with some of the racism or xenophobia. I guess it depends on how you look at it, because
Right.
they consider themselves a Cherokee nation within ours. And so either way, both of those are relatively someone not like you that you don't like because they're not like you, right? And so I wanted to kind of explore that. What's interesting about, to me, when you have strong characters, is the things that happen in 1890s happened differently just because, there wasn't electricity, or there wasn't, computers, or the but we're still a human family, and we haven't evolved so much that we don't have those same issues, whether it's around Cherokee, or whether it's around Muslim, or whether it's around, it's still here, right? It might have a different face. It might, we might put a little hat on it and it looks a little different, but it's the same problems. And the same thing with family tensions. You can't tell me that 200 years ago all families were perfect and they walked around all happy, and that unhappy families is a 2024 issue. It's not.
Right.
And loss has been going on since the dawn of time, and so I think that that's what I love about literature, is you can write a good story, and you can read a book on the story level and stay right with the story. And if you have a good storyteller, you can close that book and feel really good about it. But you can also really like dig into some things that are a little scary to dig into in person. Like, I can't put out on Facebook, you know, some remark about, something I was thinking that I realized was racist, or whatever, because the backlash that you would get. But you can read a book when you're alone and you have your own thoughts, and you can wonder what you would have done, and you can like cry out different scenarios, and there's nobody there to stop you, and nobody there to make you feel bad for anything that you thought or tried out in your own head, right? I think that books are a fabulous way to kind of experiment with things that are on topic right now.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel about it? What are you going to do about it? What will you do differently now that you have thought about it?
Yeah.
So
Well, you're speaking right to my heart, Terry, because that's the heart of bibliotherapy. Books can change us, books can heal us, books can change our minds, our perspectives, make us think differently about the world. And there were multiple points in the book that I know I did that. I know in the review that I shared out publicly, I had said that seeing how Maggie and Carrie Ann and Josie May navigated their relationships, and especially how Maggie kept an open mind. And I don't want to reveal things, but Josie May keeps an open mind too. But what I really felt like I could learn from is, as a reader, I saw all three different perspectives. And I saw the different ways the different women either held on to those perspectives or allowed flexibility with them, and what that did. And it
right.
gave me a chance to think about, okay, where might be being a little Carrie-Annish right now, or where do I need a little bit more of Maggie right
where
now?
where can I where can I open up just a little bit? I loved how Maggie, when she would go in and hear a Cherokee tradition or a medicine or something that was not common in her society, how she didn't immediately dismiss it.
Yeah,
She might even say, that's very different from anything. How can I arrange my thoughts such that I can still hang this within what I believe? So Maggie is a Christian woman, and she goes to church on Sundays, and she has Christian beliefs, and she reads from the Bible, and she goes into this Cherokee that has a very different concept from Christianity.
yeah,
And you could just say the two can't meet. The two cannot meet. There's nothing similar about them. And he always found a way to look and say, okay, like, I don't believe that in that way, but here's what I do believe. And I can see how that could be the same thing. And therefore, I can use this
Yeah.
because I can see how I can hang it on my values, you
Yeah.
know? So, and then she could walk away from that encounter having made friends and a greater understanding of not only their beliefs but her own. I think often that when she would come up against something that was so different from her, she would walk away understanding herself better because
Yes.
she had to kind of introspect and say, well, what do I believe? You
Yes.
know, and can I walk this path? Is it okay for me to do this particular custom
Yeah.
without abandoning what I believe?
Yeah.
How do I do that? And I liked it. I don't know. I love getting into her mind and saying, okay, well, what would you do? What would you do if? So I did a lot of research and I would say, okay, well, this is a tradition and this is something so significantly different than what you and I encounter in the everyday world.
Mhm.
What does she do? How does she handle this? Because if you have a closed mind, you don't go back. And yet she goes back year after year after year after year, right? And so why and how? And that's the book kind of then started taking on its own shape. But I was probably 60,000 words into the 80,000 word book before I knew how it was going to end.
Really? Oh, that is a pantser. Okay.
Yep. Yep. So I can't I can't talk too much about it, but there's a
Right.
difficult scene.
I do.
And I knew that I knew that's what needed to happen. And I didn't want it to happen, so I didn't write it. And I kept waiting for something else to strike me and so that I could write something different. And I did that for almost 2 months where I just really didn't write on this book because I didn't want to write that scene. And I finally realized you just got to write it. And then if it's no good, then you could throw it out. But you've got to write it. Your characters are insistent. So I wrote it and then I put it down because it's heavy. And the next day when I woke up, the rest of the book opened up. And I knew where it was going. I knew how it was going to end. I knew the conflict at the end and what we were going to do. I knew everything. It was like my characters had known this whole time and they were just waiting for me to get on with the process of we've already told you what's next and you won't write it. So we're not revealing anymore to you.
Right. Right.
I have very stubborn characters. They absolutely refuse. I've tried to write them into doing things that they don't want to do, and they simply don't behave. And my writing suffers for it. And when I give up and say, fine, then everything just flows beautifully again. So, yeah, I'm
That's why we love
definitely a
those
pantser.
characters. That's why we love those characters so much. They are so present.
They very much, I tell people that I have characters living in my head, but it does not mean that I'm insane. At
Right.
least I think that's what it means.
Well, one of the things I loved about your characters, and I sent you a little message about this at that point of the book, was that both first Maggie and then Josie May later, and this isn't a spoiler, it's just something that I think will appeal to a lot of members of my community, is they keep a notebook.
Yes.
And that notebook brought me so much joy, Terry, and imagining what it looked like and what it was, which was basically, a notebook where Maggie kept everything that she knew about healing, about the herbs, about what worked and what didn't, and with who and when and what should she try. And I could just imagine this notebook because like you said you are a Google research junkie. Maggie's a lifelong learner
Right.
and she is just embracing everything. And that notebook, oh, that notebook brought me so much joy to think about. And I actually have a couple of pages in my own personal notebook because your book set me down a couple of rabbit holes of, well, what herbs do I need? And what could I do?
Right.
What are the natural remedies that I could do to help me? And so I loved the notebook. I loved the writing that it sparked in mine. Um, and I'm just wondering, because we've had conversations about writing and notebooking, how did that come into the book? Was that just something you thought she needed to do?
Yeah, it's crazy. As we're sitting here talking, I suspect that it came up because you and I are friends and we talk about notebooking a lot.
We do.
And it just seemed so natural. Like I came up with the notebook idea. There's a point where Maggie shares her notebook as a Christmas gift,
Yes.
right? And that when I came up with that idea, I'm thinking, what does what do you give for gifts in this time period? They're poor. It's not like they're running out to the Sears and Roebuck and buying things, right? I mean, they have a general store, and I've already knit hats and scarves and mittens, and I've already done, you know, I've done it. Like, what would be a gift that would really be meaningful?
Yeah.
And that idea of a notebook came up. And I think partially it's because you and I talk. Partially it's also because I really value um the family history kind of stuff. Like if someone gives me my mother, for instance, 2 or 3 years ago had saved, and I did not know she had saved it. I had an autograph book as a like sixth or seventh grader, and I would have never thought of it again. I hadn't thought of it in years. And mom had found it and she gave it to me for Christmas.
Oh,
And I read every one of everything, everything. I'm crying, I'm laughing, I'm remembering people that I hadn't thought of since the seventh grade, all of those things. And so I think that's also part of it was I wanted her to give something of herself.
mhm.
And often the best thing that you can give of yourself is something like that, something that's almost an heirloom. That's I've put all of my heart and soul into this and I want to share it with you,
Yeah.
you know. And I think notebooks will can do that. Like the notebooks that you keep, someday you're going to have a granddaughter and a great granddaughter, and they're going to love to look and
Yeah.
say, "Oh, my Gigi Stephanie, you know, she
Yeah.
once said, or she did this, or I can just see them with all your tip outs and all the other things in your notebooks. They're going to just have an amazing time. I just know it." So that was part of it. I'm sure that our discussions about notebooking had that kind of at the top, but it made perfect sense. What would a granny woman be doing?
Yeah.
Not all granny women knew how to write, but we're now in the 1890s, and I have her as someone who's not highly educated, but who has some education and who values education. And so I thought she'd be writing this down, especially since she knows that her daughter and now her granddaughter are interested in healing arts.
Yeah.
This is a way of her to pass her knowledge. So
Yeah. It was one of my favorite elements to read in the book. I did get all teary when she did gift it to Josie May.
yeah.
And for the record of everyone listening, you need your Kleenex throughout this book. You need your puffs, whatever you want. You need something
The ones
because
with the extra lotion.
yes, yes, you get so tied in emotionally for sure. There's another thing, and I've been thinking, how do I say this so that readers can understand kind of the big theme or the big transformation without spoiling the story? And so I guess one thing I want to bring up, because I know this is really important to you, it started in that crazy bike ride with your husband and has been a theme of your own learning all the way through. But in this book, you have three women with different ideas of healing, right? You've got mom, who is one way, you have the daughter is another, and the granddaughter who's trying to make sense of it all. Again, without giving spoilers, what I loved about the book was the reminder to readers that in actuality, what's on the inside, underneath all of those outer layers of where we think we're different, we really aren't so different after all. And the power lies inside in that belief and not anywhere else. And I know that is a very important theme for your own
Right.
learning. And you recently had an amazing, beautiful TED Talk on this
Yeah.
very topic that I think ties so beautifully to this book. So I'm hoping you might say a little something about that so listeners can go find it.
Yeah, so it's a TEDx talk, and it it talks about kind of my journey with understanding, racism and like where I was, where I would have sworn that I didn't have a racist bone in my body. I didn't feel racist, and when people talked about racism, I I didn't think that I was part of the problem in any way. And I had an experience in which I was helping my daughter find an apartment and didn't feel like the neighborhood was safe. And she called me out on it. And I didn't feel it was safe for very obvious racial reasons. And kind of like fell apart because it was like, oh my gosh, I am part of the problem. I didn't even know I was part of the problem. In the ensuing years, I've been looking for how do you fix that? How do you fix that? And on our bicycle ride, I just found that we got along with people. We got along with all kinds of people. We got along with crazy people. When you're riding on a bicycle, the other people that you meet usually are people without cars. And people without cars tend to be more on edges of society. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you meet a
Right.
lot of unusual people out on the road going, 10 miles an hour. And we met a lot of people, but we were able to get along with everybody. And why? And it's looking for things that connect us. Because once you connect with someone, the things that separate you don't matter as much. For instance, you and I have connected on a bazillion things.
Yes.
But here are things that I don't know and I don't want to know. But here are things that I don't know. I have no idea about your religious beliefs. I have no idea about your political affiliation.
Right.
I have no idea how you feel about border control. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And yet we have long, in depth, very revealing and sharing conversations around things that we've connected with.
Yeah.
So at this point in our relationship, if you told me something where you were significantly different from me in a belief system, I would think, oh, that's interesting, would have never guessed that, and move on because it isn't going to affect our relationship at all. That's how you start. Is you find those connections. You connect with someone. And as you do, those other things begin to matter less and less and less. And the more people you connect with that are different from you in various aspects of life, the more you recognize, hey, I'm not so different. It's what happened in An Enemy Like Me. Jacob, who goes to fight an enemy. What's an enemy, right? Germans, the enemy, except that he's German American and a first generation, and they spoke German in his own home, and he ate German food and had German traditions. And oh my gosh, I am the enemy, except that he's not, right? And we all have that. That's kind of where we are. So that's kind of what my talk kind of, you know, talks about is just that idea of, you know, what makes an enemy and do we need them? Do we
Right.
really need them?
Right. And those themes, I can see them in all of your books, but
Yeah.
especially in Enemy Like Me. And I don't know if it's because I know you and I was reading Green Mountain, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap, but I could definitely see those themes. And I think that in general is the power of books, right?
Right.
To connect on that level, to just experience life or something, or meet a new character that is not like you, but it really doesn't matter because when you're reading the book, you're connecting on that emotional level, which
Right.
then hopefully.
And then when you walk away from the book, if you were to meet someone similar to that character, you now have a reference. It's a different reference than what you may have had before. I
Yes.
felt that way in Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, that when you walked away from that book, you now cared what was happening in the Ukraine.
Yes.
Why did you care? You didn't care when you picked the book up, or you might have cared, but like cared in a distant kind of way. Like, oh, I see what's happening over there. But why do you care now? Because you now have some friends,
Yeah, that's it.
right? And that idea of connection, we connect with characters. We do. If the characters are strong, you connect with them.
Mhm.
Even ones you don't like. You if the author has done a good job, you still maybe see yourself. Maybe you don't like what you see, and maybe that's the point. But you can kind of understand, like Carrie Ann is not, she's not a wonderful, I mean, she is wonderful, but she's not. There are parts of her
Yeah.
that you just want to like give her a shake and say, grow up, right?
You did.
Grow up and take a deep breath. What are you doing? But on the other hand, how many times have I needed to shake myself and
Yes.
say, grow up, Terry? Take a deep breath. Take a look around you. Why are you so rigid? You know? And then when you find out why she's so rigid, you understand. And then you say to yourself, "Oh, I wonder what it is that's making me that rigid."
Yes. Bingo.
Those
Right there.
things. Yeah.
Yes,
Cuz
those
that's
have been
cuz
some of the
that's what
lessons.
well, and that's what books do. And I love that. One of the interesting things, I love having an editor. And it was very hard the first time having an editor because I felt like she was making red marks all over my baby, and it was
Yep.
just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. The second time was a little easier. This third time I could not wait to have an editor. It was like, oh, because she has such good insight as someone who's reading the book with fresh eyes and does not know my characters intimately the way I do. She can help me see things that I'm not seeing. And one of the things that she said to me is, "You've made Carrie Ann too hard." And by the end, when we need to see the harshness, I didn't care anymore. It was just Carrie Ann doing her thing.
Mhm.
And she said, I need more humanity. You need to show that to me. And I thought, she's right. But in my mind, I knew Carrie Ann's humanity.
Right.
Right? And so I backed off. Like I pulled way back, and the editor was like, "There you go. That's what we needed." And it's those kinds of things that as an author living with the characters, I can tell you what they eat for breakfast,
Yeah.
even if I never wrote it in the book, right? And if they were living today, I can tell you what movies they'd go watch.
Yeah.
I know them. And it's hard then as an author to edit your own material because you don't recognize something's missing because it's not missing in your own head. You assume that your reader has been sitting in your head with you and they know everything that you know, and they don't. And so it's really great to have someone on the outside say, "So I really loved this. I need more of this." The number of times that my editor has said, "I need more of this." And it's like, "You do? Why?" Right? But it's because she's not in my head.
Right.
And so I love that whole aspect of writing is having someone else tell me, where am I being successful and where am I not being quite so successful, and what it is that she sees and why. And it allows me then to go back and say, okay, as the reader, let me try to blank out. Yep, I can see where a reader might need more here and here. And now that she's pointed it out to me, I can go back with a critical eye and say, okay, so here's where And oh, that is a little harsh, probably doesn't need to be there, you know, that kind of thing. And then you can go back through and make those changes.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand. They think an editor actually like does the rewriting, and they don't. It's not like my book comes back to me rewritten and then I accept the changes. It comes back with a note like, need more here,
Right.
or I don't understand the character's motivation here. You
And
know,
that's your
and
job.
then you have to go back and say, oh, okay, well, if she didn't understand it,
Yeah.
then more than likely my readers aren't going to either. So how do I make her understand it?
Yeah.
So
Well, I turned the last page feeling like all three of those women were real and alive and now new friends. And, more than once I've stood in this is so embarrassing to admit, but more than once I've stood in the aisle of Target or Walmart looking at the wall of supplements and saying, what would Maggie think I should get right now? Because that's always been an interest for me. And so these
right.
characters, they're real, they're here, like now they are, they're not fictional, because they're so relatable. So yeah,
I
Walmart.
do I do want to offer a word of caution. I am not a doctor. Okay. So I do talk about some of the remedies that were used at that time, and that is research, and that was true, but I am not recommending that
Right,
someone who has kidney issues goes out and like concocts a tea. That's not the point, you know. The
right.
point is just to understand the other things I really like people to think about is we have a tendency to get something new and shiny and throw everything old out the window as
Mhm.
though it's all horrible. We have this new, beautiful, shiny thing. In the ensuing time, sometimes it's a year and sometimes it's 20 and sometimes it's 80 years, all of a sudden people are running back after that old thing that they threw out because there was some good to it. You know, it didn't have to all be thrown out. And I think there's a way to marry some of the old and new things together. Like maybe there is some really good stuff with this new, but it doesn't mean that everything we used to do is now,
Right.
you know, throw it out. And so, you know, do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? And the answer is yeah, we usually do. And maybe we should stop that.
Yeah.
Like we need to kind of look, and it's the way I feel about medicine. I am very grateful for modern medicine. Very, very grateful because, well, three of my four children wouldn't still be here without modern medicine. You know, I'm very, very grateful. On the other hand, modern medicine tends not to deal with you until you're sick,
Mm.
whereas the granny woman's theory was more about maintaining your health. You know, there was a lot more preventative type. You drink certain things and you eat certain things and you do certain things to keep yourself as healthy as possible because there wasn't a freaking doctor around to come save you from yourself, right? But we threw all that out. And now we wait until all of our numbers on our blood work say there's something really wrong.
Right.
When really, when we start seeing a little edge in our blood work, we should be saying, hmm, you know, I know it's still in the normal range, but it's not my normal anymore. My normal has always been a 10 and it's now a 14.
Right.
You know, but that's not the way our medical model works. We have to wait until we're, you know, out of the normal range.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's interesting to look at things like the herbal supplements and the things is helping our bodies help themselves.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, our bodies are amazing. They are amazing. They have amazing capabilities. And if we give them what they need, those capabilities are better than if we withhold it and, you know, eat nothing but
Yeah.
cookies and ice cream, which is like my favorite thing in the world. So,
We may have shared a story or two
yeah.
about some of that. Yeah, and that's what your book does. It gives you a story, it gives you all those themes we mentioned, but it also gives you this content to think about, which is very current right now,
Yeah.
of these medical models and how can you help yourself um, in more ways than one. So yeah, there's a section of my notebook with some ideas, and I had Google and my phone right by my hand. The one last thing I want to mention um, before we start to sign off is the food. So, way back, food was simple,
Yep.
but man, every time there was a mention of apple cake or something really good, I thought, oh my gosh, I got that warm, family, cozy feeling, even though it is way back, right? With no electricity and none of the things, that feeling of warmth and family and food and comfort, oh,
Yep.
it was so present and so wonderful.
Oh, good. I did the same thing. In fact, all three of my books have food. So it probably says something about me. I'm sure some psychiatrist somewhere is having a field day with that. But I think that especially when you're writing a historical fiction, but really at any time, there are so many traditions that people have around holidays and food and in the preparation of food and you know that it's almost hard to not bring food into the mix.
Yeah,
Like in that period of time, especially on Christmas Day, one of the things that they did was they went from house to house. They
yeah,
all had food. They brought food. They ate food. They took food. And it's what you did. And they even had a tradition that a certain number of people had to come to your house or you were going to have bad luck the rest of the year. So this was a whole thing, and it was around this idea of food, but like you said, the foods were not, you know, some kind of souffle or something. I mean, it was things that they could make with flour and honey and the apples that grew, wild in the trees that they picked every year and the the green beans that they canned and the things that they had that they then brought out at Christmas. And you figure at Christmas time, they're not bringing out anything fresh. So these are all things that they have put up and preserved, and now they're bringing out to create their, stuff that they do in the winter when it's too cold to go anywhere.
I admit for a moment I thought, maybe canning is my next thing. And then I quickly said no. I don't know if I
I
can figure that out.
tried it. I actually tried it, and what's interesting is, um, I love the flavor of home canned like applesauce and peaches, and I have done it. It is so much more expensive, which is crazy because that's not the way it started.
Right.
But it started back when people had their own orchards and they had their own gardens and they had their own. And for me to do apples, I have to go to someone's orchard
Yeah.
and I have to buy a bushel. And then and it,
Yeah.
that's a lot. That's
Yeah.
a lot. So financially, it's kind of crazy. And then just the amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what it's like peeling all those apples? Peeling a bushel of apples and getting it all done and then mashing them, cooking them and mashing them wow. Making applesauce is
Yeah.
the labor of love.
Yes. And maybe, someone reading it, that may be their thing, and this book could spark a really fun
Exactly.
new habit.
Exactly.
Uh, Terry, this book is beautiful. It's
Thank you.
remarkable in so many ways. It is my favorite so far. Who knows? Book four might end up being the
You
favorite
never know.
later on. I just hope that people listening can hear, how powerful, how wonderful it is. They know that I love it. I've talked about it in a couple of places. Where can listeners find you and your books?
The best way to find me is to go to my website, which is my name, Terry M. Brown, and it's Terry with one R, .com. And there I have links for all of my social media and I'm on everything. And you can sign up for my newsletter, which I would love for you to do. I try not to overwhelm people with my newsletter. It's just two a month. One usually talks about reader things, stuff I've been like writer things, stuff I've been writing and what I'm doing and any awards, those kinds of things. And then the other one is books I've been reading. And so I try to do a review of the books that I've currently been reading and what I thought and why. Um, and so, yeah, I'd love for you to sign up for that and keep up with me. And, I throw out little tidbits about myself all the time because I'm probably the least private person you'll ever meet.
Your newsletters are fun. I enjoy reading them. But related to the books that you're reading and writing, you got to put a little plug for that new podcast of yours out there too.
Oh, well, thank you. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about that. So,
Oh, heck yeah.
so I have taken over a podcast that is called Online for Authors. Jennifer Palmer had been the host and she needed to pull back. And I had been a guest host for several months and really enjoyed it. And she let me know that she was going to have to let it go and asked me if I wanted it. And I said, no, no, I don't have the time. I don't want it, except that I do want it, but I don't want it, but I do want it. And in the end, I do want it one. And so now I am the host of Online for Authors, and I read books. Try to read books from authors who are a lot like me. We've got good things to say, and they're excellent books, but they aren't out in the mainstream yet. It's really hard to get, unless an Oprah Winfrey finds you, it's almost impossible to get like the nation to know you exist. So I want to give them a place that, if I've read the book and I enjoyed the book and I think it's got some merit, I would love to talk about the book with them. So that's what I do. Online for Authors comes out every Tuesday.
Awesome. Well, I will put links to your website and your social feeds and the podcast into the show notes.
Fantastic.
So listeners can just click and they can find you and they can grab one or two or three of your books.
Absolutely.
This was so nice to talk in real life, in person, beyond our back and forth voice messages. Thank you so much for coming on, Terry. This was so much fun. I'm so excited to put Daughters of Green Mountain Gap out there into listeners' hands.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you inside the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.